Hello, I'm Mariana Hartley, and I'm here with Senior Staff Archaeologist Sean Romo. We're with Jamestown Rediscovery Foundation, and we're continuing our series of Archaeology 101. If you followed us last time, we talked a little bit about how we decide where to dig and the units, test units that we dig in on the site. This time we're going to talk a little bit about the different layers that we encounter here on Jamestown Island. Welcome to another episode of Dig Deeper. At Jamestown, it's very rare for anything from the colonial period to survive above ground. The church tower, built in the 1680s, is the only standing structure from the 17th century that survives. In most cases, the foundations, post holes, cellars related to structures out here, or the ditches and wells from the 17th century landscape are either removed or they've been covered over by soil. So how does all this stuff get buried? This is a common question we get all the time. One of the ways that soil builds up on the site is naturally occurring. So it's from water or wind shifting the soils around during weather events, or from bioturbation from animals or plants moving around the soil. Just in general, geologists tell us that we get about half an inch of soil buildup about 50 years just naturally occurring on the site. However, in most cases, most of the soils we see are put down by human hands. It's human activities on the site. We call this soil buildup overburden that covers over our earlier features. And yes, sometimes it is a burden to remove. Today, most of us have seen when a building or a home has been demolished or destroyed, either intentionally or by a weather event or fire, naturally occurring events like hurricanes and tornadoes. In most cases, the above ground structure that you see is completely demolished. It no longer stands, but some of the evidence for that building survives below the ground. A lot of times, if a bulldozer comes and destroys the building or takes it down, there's still debris remaining and evidence that the building once stood there. It's just been landscaped over top. That's what we have here at Jamestown, is a lot of times there's landscaping that's done that covers over the early 17th century landscape out here. And there's a great example behind me in this stratigraphy for this test unit.
We're back over here where we were last time we had an Archaeology 101 video, near our burial. Now, unfortunately, the stratigraphy here has been completely destroyed. All of this stuff, as nice as it looks in the wall here, that's all modern. This is actually the bottom of a road bed. And when this road was installed back in the 1950s, the group that did it came in here with a smooth-bladed excavator, a backhoe, and ripped away any of the soil that was in this space. That eliminated any surviving intact stratigraphy. But we know what the original stratigraphy would have looked like before anything happened here. The original stratigraphy for the island. It should be a nice dark brown topsoil, about this thick, and then a similarly thick tan or beige sand. And then at the very bottom, you have this nice orange clay. That's our natural subsoil, and that's all we're left with in this space. Now, the topsoil and that tan sand are actually layers that can have evidence of human activity within them. This clay is completely natural. There's not going to be any evidence of human occupation within the clay deposit, except for archaeological features that are cut in. But that topsoil should have artifacts dating to the English colonial period and any Native American occupations that are roughly contemporary. And that, by the way, is called an A horizon geologically. And then below that, that sand layer is actually a really, really ancient topsoil. That is so ancient that organic acids have leached away all the organic material and left just the mineral component. And that's going to have evidence of Native American occupations typically. Now, those are the layers here at Jamestown. And when we see that they've been removed or they're churned up and redeposited somewhere else, it gives us a clue as to what's been going on in a particular location. But these are not necessarily going to be the same layers you see elsewhere in Virginia or the United States. Depending on where you are, the underlying geology might be different, right? And so every time you dig at a site, you need to try to figure out what that original natural deposit, those original natural layers are going to look like, so you can better understand what has happened in your area.
We're down in a test unit that we opened with our field school students this past summer. We opened 2 units that are just north of the church tower, and we actually left bulks between our test units and on this north side, between a unit that was dug in 2000 and the unit we were working in order to look at the stratigraphy in the unit as we dug down through the layers. Now this enables us to look at each of those individual layers and then see if we missed anything. Perhaps one of these layers wasn't across the whole unit, it was only in the northern side and continued from the unit just to the north. This allows us to take another look at it. Now the different layers, as you can see here, you can see a nice modern layer that has our gravel that we use on the site to lay down our crush and run for our paths on the site or our roads. This stuff right here, we actually have photographs of putting down in 2005. So all of that is modern material. Sometimes you'll find chewing gum wrappers or modern coinage that is in these layers that'll help clue you in as to exactly when it was deposited. This layer right here is pre-2005 and was actually a kind of park layer. And then underneath that, you see this nice brick layer. That's the beginning of our historic layers from the colonial period intact on the site. This is one of those areas where we have a lot of information surviving because we're in the churchyard. So this area was not plowed for farming. It wasn't scraped down a lot with a lot of human activities during the period in which the church was here. And that gives us a lot of early information for when these layers would have been placed. Now we're very interested in this brick layer. So far we're thinking it dates to about 1800. Directly below that though, we started to hit layers that had tons of early 17th century materials that we think relate to James Fort. And so when we look at which features are sealed by these layers or cutting through, we're getting insight into the expansion of James Fort or maybe some of the fortifications that were placed here along the wall during the fort period from 1607 to about 1624.
As Mariana was saying, this space is one of the few areas currently open that we actually have intact natural stratigraphy. So below all of our later layers, we actually have the original topsoil for the island. This is the ground surface that the English colonists would have walked on in 1607 when they arrived. And we find in this, cut into it, archaeological features that date to the beginning of the colony. So we find post holes and planting furrows that the English colonists created in this space. Now within this deposit, we also find Native American artifacts because this was Native American territory. And so we see artifacts in this soil that attest to that occupation. Not every damage or removal of stratigraphy is caused by modern machinery. And across Virginia and really the United States as a whole, one of the most common things to have happen to an archaeological site is plowing. So in the late 1700s, a new type of plow is invented that goes through about the top foot of soil and churns it all up. Now, when a plow does this, any layers that may have been in that foot of soil get jumbled together. So if you had a site that originally had 5 different layers, 1620, 1630, 1700, so on, when that plow comes through, those layers are erased and homogenized into one solid block we call a plow zone. Now the artifacts from those layers stay in that plow zone, so you might find artifacts from 100 years mixed together in the same area. Now, if you look behind me where our team's working here at our North Field site, in the wall you can actually see one of these plow zones. It starts right under the topsoil and it's just a solid block of kind of gray-brown soil until you hit the underlying subsoil that these guys are going to be cleaning off. So plow zone is kind of a good and a bad thing. On the one hand, where we find plow zone, we know we just really have one layer to take out usually before we see archaeological features. On the other hand, we're missing a lot of the original stratigraphy. So we've lost some information, but we're usually able to dig through plow zone a lot faster than we would a more intact area. Now, underneath the plow zone is typically subsoil, right, our base clay layer, and archaeological features. And so once the plow zone's removed, we usually find features from several different time periods together at the same level. So we get to see things a little bit faster when there's a plow zone on the site, even though we've lost that information. So when you're visiting an archaeological site, you may hear the archaeologists talk about digging in natural layers or arbitrary levels. And what they mean isn't that we're only taking out the natural stratigraphy. What natural layers means is following the obvious breaks between one soil and another. And the idea is that if you see a dark gray layer and then you've got one that's orange underneath, you take those out separately. We call those natural layers. And the idea is that they represent a single event, even if it's a long-term event, single deposition of soil. So an old topsoil that's built up over 30 years is just one layer, but then the landscaping that Mariana was showing you earlier, that's also its own thing. And we separate those out because we might be able to see artifacts in there that speak to that specific event or what's going on at the site in that space. But it's really just one thing. Now, sometimes you have soils like our old topsoil or the underlying tan sand, which geologically is an E horizon, that ancient topsoil, that might have evidence for multiple occupations in it, but we can't actually see separations between those because either they built up over such a long period of time, that old topsoil being hundreds or thousands of years old and just naturally building up, or because it's so old that the breaks have disappeared, like in that E horizon, that really ancient stuff, which might have had separations or features visible back in the day, but because all the organic materials leached out, because it's been here so long, those boundaries have disappeared. In those cases, we dig in arbitrary levels, and so we'll subdivide that deposit into 5 or 10 centimeter deposits and take them out separately. So you might be digging within the bounds of that topsoil, but break it up and take each little level out separately. The thought process here is that if there were different occupations, by parsing it really finely, we might be able to see where there are artifact concentrations that go together and tell us about what was happening in that space, even though we can't tell those boundaries anymore. So you may be thinking now, well, you probably dig plow zone out in arbitrary levels. And we don't actually do that because plow zone is a jumble. It's a mixture. All the original soil layers are homogenized together. And so the stratigraphy has really been destroyed there. It's not that we can't see it, it's that it's kind of all mixed together. And so digging in arbitrary levels wouldn't actually tell us anything. Unlike the really old topsoil, where we just can't see the breaks anymore, but it is as it was originally laid down.
Okay, during our first Archaeology 101 video, we promised you that the second one would include layers and features, but who are we kidding? There's no way we could have covered both in this episode. Jamestown is just too rich with the amount of examples, especially during this time of the dig season.
So we're going to focus on features in an upcoming video instead. So stay tuned with us with Dig Deeper and our Archaeology 101 series, and we're going to have a lot of good information coming up for you soon. Thanks for watching.